Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books in Bytes. Today we're diving deep into, well, a true philosophical game changer. David Hume's A Treatise of Human Nature.
It's a book that really takes you on a whirlwind tour of the human mind, shakes up traditional views on knowledge, morality, even what makes you you.
So maybe not exactly light reading for a lazy Sunday afternoon then.
Not exactly, no, but it's incredibly rewarding if you put the effort in. Think of it like this. Hume's giving us kind of the philosophical equivalent of a toolkit for understanding how our minds work. He wants to dissect human nature, figure out the nuts and bolts.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So what tools are we talking about here? What's in this philosophical toolkit? Give the quick tour before we unpack it all.
Well, Hume starts with what you could call the foundation of all knowledge, our experiences.
Yeah.
He argues that everything we know, from the simplest ideas to the most complex, ultimately comes from our senses, our feelings, our interactions with the world around us.
Okay, so no preloaded apps in the brain. Everything we know is learned. That makes intuitive sense, at least to me.
Exactly. And from that seemingly simple idea, he builds this intricate structure, exploring how our minds connect ideas, why we make the choices we do, even why we consider certain actions right and others wrong.
And he does all of that in this one book. Ambitious is an understatement. So where do we even begin with a project this vast?
Well, the best place to start is at the beginning, right? With Hume's core argument that all our knowledge comes from experience. He calls this the principle of empiricism.
All right, empiricism it is. Break it down for us. What does that actually mean, though, in the context of Hume's work?
Essentially, what Hume's saying is that we're born as blank slates. And it's through our senses that we start to form a picture of the world. Imagine a baby, for example, encountering the world for the first time. They touch something hot, they feel pain, and that experience creates an impression in their minds.
Ouch. I can practically feel that metaphorical burn. So that's an impression. What happens next in Hume's framework?
That raw sensation, that impression, is what gives rise to an idea. The baby might not know the word hot yet, but the idea of something causing pain is now kind of planted in their mind.
So impressions are the vivid, immediate sensations, and ideas are the fainter copies that linger in our minds, like a sensory echo, almost.
Precisely. And Hume argues that all our complex thoughts, even really abstract concepts like justice or infinity, can ultimately be traced back to these simple impressions derived from our experiences.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this building blocks approach works. We start with simple sensations and build up from there. But how do we go from the feeling of a burning flame to understanding, say, the laws of physics? That seems like a massive leap.
That's where Hume's principle of association comes in. He argues that our minds don't just passively receive impressions, they actively connect them based on certain principles. He identifies three main ones: resemblance, contiguity, and cause and effect.
All right, let's dive into those a bit. Resemblance seems fairly straightforward.
It is. Think about how a portrait of someone can instantly evoke memories of that person, even if they're long gone. The resemblance triggers the association.
Or how seeing a certain type of flower, maybe, might remind me of my grandmother's garden. That resemblance can spark a whole chain of memories and emotions. What about contiguity? That one sounds a little trickier.
Contiguity basically means things being close to each other, either in space or time. If you hear a siren, for example, you almost instinctively look around for an emergency vehicle. We naturally associate things that happen close together.
It's like how a particular song can transport you back to a specific time and place. Those memories are so strongly linked. Okay, and the last one. Cause and effect. That feels like a biggie.
It is. It's how we learn about the consequences of our actions and how the world works. You touch that hot stove, you get burned. You learn pretty quickly that the stove caused the pain.
And that experience, however unpleasant, helps us navigate the world more effectively, right? We avoid similar dangers in the future because of it.
Exactly. These principles of association, as simple as they might seem, form the bedrock of Hume's theory of knowledge. They explain how we move from basic sensations to those complex understandings of the world around us.
It's like he's giving us a glimpse into the machinery of the mind. Okay, so we've got these building blocks of impressions, these principles of association, but how does that all come together to shape our understanding of, well, everything? Where do we go from here in the treatise?
That's where things get even more intriguing. Hume uses these basic principles to tackle some of the biggest questions in philosophy, starting with the very nature of reality itself. He argues that because all our knowledge is rooted in our perceptions, We can never be absolutely certain about the existence of an external world independent of our minds.
Hold on, now he's really shaking things up. So if I see a tree outside my window, I can't be sure it actually exists.
This is where Hume's skepticism comes into play. It's not that he's saying the external world definitely doesn't exist. It's more that we can never step outside our own minds to confirm it. We only ever have access to our perceptions, the sights, sounds, feelings, and thoughts within our own heads.
So I'm trapped in my own personal sensory bubble, in a way. That's both fascinating and a little unnerving. But if we can't be sure about the external world, how do we function on a daily basis? I mean, I still have to trust that the chair I'm sitting on won't just vanish into thin air.
You and me both. And Hume provides a practical solution, even within this seeming radical skepticism. He points to the principle of custom, or habit, as the glue that holds our everyday understanding together.
Okay, so what role does custom play in all of this?
Think about it. We've experienced objects having a certain consistency throughout our lives. The sun rises every morning, dropped objects fall to the ground. This constant conjunction of impressions leads us to expect things to behave in certain ways.
So even though we can't prove with absolute certainty that the sun will rise tomorrow, our lived experience creates a very strong expectation that it will.
Exactly. And Hume argues that these habits of mind, built up over a lifetime of experiences, are what allow us to navigate the world, make decisions, and even form beliefs about things we can't directly observe.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not blind faith, it's a reasoned trust based on a lifetime of consistent experiences. So Hume's skepticism, while initially jarring, actually offers a nuanced view of how we interact with the world.
Absolutely. And it's from this foundation of empiricism and skepticism that he launches into even deeper explorations of the human mind. He tackles the nature of the self, our understanding of cause and effect, the role of emotions in our reasoning.
All big stuff. It seems like with Hume, there's always another layer to uncover.
You got that right. But as we'll see, even as he delves into these complex areas, he never strays far from his core belief that any true understanding of the human condition has to begin with a careful examination of our own experiences. So, welcome back to our deep dive into David Hume's A Treatise of Human Nature. Before we went on, we were sort of tracing Hume's argument that even our most basic assumptions about the world, like the existence of a stable and permanent self, they deserve a closer look.
It's a dizzying thought, really, to question something that feels so fundamental to who we are.
Yeah.
So how does Hume approach this idea of the self? Does he think it's all just an illusion?
Well, he certainly doesn't give it a free pass, that's for sure. Hume argues that when we actually try to pin down this self, this thing we feel so strongly, it ends up being, well, frustratingly elusive. We experience this constant stream of thoughts, feelings, sensations, but we never actually find this separate, unchanging I that exists independently of those experiences.
So it's not like there's a little me sitting in the control room of my mind observing all these thoughts and feelings coming and going.
Precisely. Hume's famous analogy is that the self is more like a theater. Different perceptions are constantly appearing and disappearing on the stage of our awareness, right? But there's no single unchanging audience member watching the show. There's just the ever-shifting flow of experience itself.
It's almost like, trying to grab onto a handful of water or something. The harder you squeeze, the less you seem to actually grasp.
A perfect analogy. Hume argues that what we call the self is more like a bundle of these ever-changing perceptions, loosely bound together by things like memory, habits, associations. It's a dynamic process, fluid, not some static thing.
Okay, I see how this connects back to his earlier ideas about experience being the foundation of knowledge. If we can only truly know our own perceptions, then this idea of a solid, unchanging self starts to kind of crumble, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And this has some pretty profound implications for how we think about, identity, responsibility, even morality. But before we go down those rabbit holes, let's stick with Hume's exploration of the mind for a bit longer, if that's all right. He doesn't stop at the self. He goes on to tackle another cornerstone of human understanding, cause and effect.
Right. Cause and effect it is.
Yeah.
Isn't that fairly straightforward, though? I mean, we see it at play all the time in our lives, right? I flip a switch, the light turns on. Cause and effect.
It seems intuitive, right? But Hume asks a really interesting question here. He asks, how do we actually know that one event causes another? Is there like an invisible force connecting them, or is it something else entirely?
Okay, yeah, now you're making me question everything. I have a feeling this is where Hume's skepticism rears its head again.
Exactly. He argues that we never actually observe causation itself, only a sequence of events. We see, for example, the billiard ball hit another ball, and then we see that second ball move. But we don't directly experience some, mysterious causal force passing between them.
So how do we explain that, though? That undeniable feeling that one event made the other happen. Like, we see a rock fly towards a window, the window shatters. It feels almost impossible to deny that the rock caused the window to break.
Absolutely. And Hume doesn't deny that we have this strong intuition, this feeling of necessary connection between events, but he attributes it to, well, the workings of our own minds, not to something inherent in the external world itself.
I'm sensing a pattern here.
You're catching on. Hume argues that our minds are kind of, hardwired to find patterns, to create associations. We experience, say, event A happening before event B repeatedly, and our brains, always looking for order and predictability, naturally forge a causal link between them.
So it's not that causation doesn't exist. It's more that our understanding of it is based on, like, our own mental habits and expectations, not on some directly observable force out there in the world.
Exactly. It's another example of Hume emphasizing the central role of human perception, human experience, in shaping our understanding of, well, everything. We don't just passively absorb knowledge, right? We actively construct it based on the information available to our senses and the way our minds naturally work.
It's a humbling thought to realize how much of what we take for granted is actually, filtered through the lens of our own minds. It's almost like we're looking at the world through a pair of, like, custom-made glasses.
And those glasses, according to Hume, are tinted by more than just our senses and experiences. He argues that our emotions actually play a much, much larger role in our reasoning than we might think.
Now, that's a potentially controversial idea.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, myself included, we like to think of ourselves as, primarily rational beings. Tell me more about this, how Hume connects emotions to reason.
Well, he has this famous quote, "Reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions." And by this, he's not, advocating for irrationality or anything like that. He's simply pointing out that reason on its own can't actually motivate us to act.
So reason provides the information, but emotion provides the fuel, so to speak.
Exactly. Think about it. You can know all the logical reasons in the world to say eat healthy and exercise, right? But unless you actually have a desire to be healthy, those reasons alone aren't going to get you to the gym. It's the passion, that desire for a particular outcome, that really drives our actions.
It's like that old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. No amount of logical persuasion will actually get you to do something you're not already, internally motivated to do. So where does morality fit into all of this?
That's where things get really interesting, because if reason alone can't motivate us and our emotions are such powerful drivers, what does that mean for our moral judgments?
It almost feels like we're venturing into, like, dangerous territory here. If morality isn't based on some objective standard of right and wrong, does that mean it's all just thoughts and subjective, a matter of personal preference?
That's a common concern, and Hume grapples with it directly.
Yes.
He argues that our moral judgments aren't actually based on cold, hard reason, but rather on our feelings, our sentiments. We deem actions virtuous because, on some level, they evoke feelings of approval within us, and we judge actions as wrong because they elicit, disapproval, maybe even disgust.
Okay, so instead of logic and reason, handing down the pronouncements on what's right and wrong, it's our emotional responses that are making those calls. That's a fascinating, if unexpected, way to look at morality. Can you give me an example of how that works in practice?
Sure. Imagine you see someone being treated cruelly, right? You likely feel a surge of, disapproval, maybe even anger towards the perpetrator. That feeling of disapproval, Hume would argue, that is the foundation of your moral judgment that the action was wrong.
It's like our gut reactions, our emotional responses are the first line of judgment, in a way, when it comes to morality. But if it is our emotions driving the bus, so to speak, doesn't that get messy? Our feelings can be so subjective, so inconsistent.
That's true, and Hume recognizes that. He doesn't claim that every, fleeting feeling is a reliable guide for moral action. But he argues that our moral sentiments, they're not just arbitrary or, entirely individual. They're shaped by our social nature, our upbringing, the shared values of the communities we're a part of.
So there's a kind of social calibration, in a way, that happens to our moral compass.
Exactly. We observe how others react to certain behaviors. We learn what actions are considered praiseworthy or blameworthy within our social circles. And these experiences, they all help to kind of refine and shape our own moral judgments.
So even though morality itself might be grounded in sentiment, in feeling, It's not entirely a free-for-all. There's a shared understanding of what constitutes right and wrong that emerges from our interactions with others.
Precisely. And this shared moral sense, this is, according to Hume, essential for the very functioning of society. It's
Yeah.
what allows us to live together, to cooperate, to trust one another.
It's like Hume is drawing a line from like our individual experiences of the world all the way to these vast social structures that hold us together. We started with those simple impressions, and now we're talking about the foundations of morality of society. It's quite a journey.
And it doesn't stop there. Hume goes on to tackle the very thorny issue of free will, building on his ideas about causation and the role of the passions. But we're coming up on a break, so I'll have to save that part of the discussion for next time.
So welcome back, everybody. We're still trying to find our way through the fascinating and sometimes pretty perplexing world of David Hume's philosophy.
Right. Picking up where we left off, we were teasing apart Hume's ideas about morality being rooted in sentiment rather
Yeah.
than, pure reason.
Right, exactly. But there's still this big question looming over, I think, everything we've discussed so far, this question of free will. If our moral judgments are so driven by emotions, and those emotions are themselves, products of our experiences and our upbringing and all that, how much agency do we really have? Where does free will even fit in?
You're really hitting on a point that's puzzled philosophers for centuries, and Hume definitely doesn't shy away from it. He dives right into this debate, and he connects it back to his ideas about cause and effect, which we talked about earlier.
So is he saying that basically all our actions are predetermined? That this whole idea of free will is, just an illusion?
Well, Hume's argument is that every action we take, just like, every event in the universe, it has a cause. He doesn't really see our choices as being, like, exempt from this principle of cause and effect.
But if everything is, causally determined like that, how can we be held responsible for our actions? It seems like we're just cogs in a machine.
It's a natural concern, for sure. But Hume argues that this deterministic view, it doesn't necessarily have to lead to some kind of, moral chaos or nihilism. He makes a distinction between what he calls liberty of spontaneity and liberty of indifference.
Okay, those sound like two very specific types of freedom. Break it down for me. What's the difference?
So liberty of indifference, in Hume's view, this would mean that our actions are totally random, completely uncaused by, any prior event or desire. And Hume actually sees this as, well, not just nonsensical, but even detrimental to morality.
Oh, really? Why is that? How could random actions be a bad thing?
Well, think about it. If our actions were truly random, they wouldn't be connected to, well, anything. Not to our character, not to our values, not to the very things that make us who we are.
So random actions wouldn't really be us acting at all, just sort of like random occurrences happening.
Exactly. Just a roll of the dice, so to speak. Now, liberty of spontaneity, on the other hand, this is the freedom to act according to our own desires, our own motivations, even if those desires are themselves, products of our experiences, of the causal chain of events that led us to this point.
Okay, so it's like saying that, yeah, even if the river of my life is, flowing in a certain direction, I can still steer the boat. I can still make choices about how I navigate those currents, even if ultimately I didn't choose the river itself.
I love that analogy. That's a great way to put it. Our choices, they still matter. They still reflect, who we are as individuals, even if they're not, completely and totally free from this kind of like causal influence that started long before we were even born. And because our actions do have real consequences in the world, right? It's still important. It's still vital to hold people accountable for the choices they make.
That's a much more, I don't know, nuanced view of free will than I think a lot of people might expect. It's not about some kind of absolute freedom from causality, from the laws of physics and the experiences that shape us, but about, understanding and working within that framework, within the framework of our own motivations and the forces that shape them.
Precisely. And this is a big part of where I think Hume's philosophy gets really practical. He's not just, up in the clouds somewhere building these abstract theories. He wants to understand the human condition, in its totality.
So as we kind of start to bring this deep dive to a close, what do you think the main takeaway is for us? For us, the readers grappling with these ideas centuries later, what's the lasting impact of this book, of Hume's work?
Well, I think more than anything, Hume's treatise, it's a call to self-reflection. It's a challenge, really, to question our assumptions. And not just our assumptions about, the world out there, but also our assumptions about our own minds, about how we think and feel and make decisions. He reminds us that certainty, real certainty, is elusive. Our understanding is always, always filtered through these lenses of perception and personal experience, and that our emotions, as messy as they can be, they're not just obstacles to reason, they're actually essential components of what makes us human.
I like that. He doesn't offer any, easy answers, but he gives us this powerful framework for approaching life's big questions with, I think, a healthy dose of skepticism, a bit of humility, and really just a deep appreciation for the amazing complexities of the human experience.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And that to me is the true enduring legacy of a treatise of human nature. It's a book that centuries later continues to spark debate, to challenge assumptions, and just to inspire, deeper thinking about what it means to be human in a world that, let's face it, we can never fully grasp.
Well said. A fitting ending to our deep dive into David Hume. Thank you so much for guiding us through it all.
It's been my pleasure. It's always so much fun to revisit Hume's ideas, to see how relevant they still are, how much they still resonate with readers even today.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has, sparked your curiosity. Remember, this whole quest for understanding, it's an ongoing journey. So keep those minds open and those books close at hand. Until next time on Books and Bytes.